This is a story that that popped up on the timeline. It's about immigration, which was, of course, President Trump's number one issue, now dating back 10 years. I mean, immigration is the central point.
Yeah.
But he had something very interesting where he seemed to be, if not reversing, at least modulating his position on H-1B visas, which are like almost like temporary worker visas for, supposedly high skilled workers in tech, in business, and in other fields. And so let's roll the clip and then give us your take.
Sure.
Does that mean the H-1B visa thing will not be a big priority for your administration? Because if you want to raise wages for American workers, you can't flood the country with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of foreign workers.
You also do have to bring in talent. We
have plenty of talented people here.
No, you don't.
We don't have talented people here?
No, you don't have certain talents, and people have to learn. You can't take people off an unemployment line and say, I'm going to put you into a factory where we're going to make missiles, or I'm going to put
How did we ever do it before?
You can't just say a country's coming in, going to invest $10 billion to build a plant, and going to take people off an unemployment line who haven't worked in 5 years, and they're going to start making missiles. It doesn't work that way.
This is my I'm not terribly happy about this kind of rhetoric face, but I'm going to try to be tactful here. I mean, the truth is, like, Trump has always been a little squishy on this issue. Even if you go back to before the election, there was an episode on the All In podcast where he was talking about sort of preserving H-1Bs. He was also talking about preserving foreign student visa.
Let me just tell you that it's so sad when we lose people from Harvard, MIT, from the greatest schools, and lesser schools that are phenomenal schools also. And what I wanted to do, and I would have done this, but then we had to solve the COVID problem. But what I want to do and what I will do is you graduate from a college, I think you should get automatically as part of your diploma a green card to be able to stay in this country. And that includes junior colleges too. Anybody graduates from a college, you go in there for 2 years or 4 years. If you graduate or you get a doctorate degree from a college, you should be able to stay in this country.
This was seen as a kind of compromise with the quote unquote tech right, the tech sort of, at least they say they're dependent on these H-1Bs to sort of continue the business model that they currently have, which is actually probably true, although it is not therefore incumbent on the United States people and on President Trump to allow them to continue these abusive practices with regards to H-1B. So while that might be their business model, it ought not to be their business model. And we may have to take some coercive action so that they change their business model. But I understand as like a political practical matter, I think this is like something he has kind of demonstrated some willingness to compromise on. Unfortunately, I'm not terribly happy with that. But I also think like people are taking this way out of proportion. It is a statement on a news show that is not necessarily reflected in what is actually happening from a policy point of view. And so every time like Trump says something, you have people kind of like losing their minds. This is the thing. Like we know from Trump that he talks out of sort of both sides of his mouth. He tells people at certain times one thing, and then in another context will say a different thing. And this leaves him a lot of space for negotiation. And by this point, it sort of surprises me that people don't understand the way he speaks publicly is not always indicative of his policy prescriptions. Let me just say this, though, as like a matter. And then I'm curious because I know you have some stories about H-1Bs like and how they operate in big tech. We need to get rid of the program entirely. I think Mark Krikorian, the great Mark Krikorian from the Center of Immigration Studies, he's written at length about this. There are a number of ways to do this. The idea behind the H-1Bs as these workers that we cannot replace is true of maybe like 1.5% to 2% of these H-1Bs. And the way that you can construct a model for delineating between the ones we actually need versus the excess that can actually be replaced by American workers is by setting a very high floor on the salary that any company would have to pay to retain an H-1B worker. Right now, it's only about 2.5% that make over $150,000 a year. I believe I might have that number a little bit wrong. That may be the 250,000 number. In any case, that number should be a floor of $250,000. That would mean that it comes at an incredible cost to bring in, not an incredible, but a sizable cost to bring in an H-1B worker for these firms. And they're going to be much better off. They're going to be incentivized to find American workers who can do that work and then train up American workers as replacements.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen it a little bit in my time in Seattle. I have a lot of friends in tech at the big companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Google. And one thing I learned just walking the floor, they have these large pits in these buildings, like a skyscraper in Bellevue, Washington, for one of the big tech companies. They have this open office floor plan. And I'll tell you a funny story. So I remember I went in with my wife, who was working there at the time. And I go in, there's like hundreds of people sitting at these computers, and they're virtually all East Asian and South Asian, Chinese and Indian, with maybe some Pakistanis, maybe some Koreans, but mostly Chinese and Indian. The whole floor virtually. One of my wife's colleagues comes up, gal from Pakistan. She says, "Oh, you look just like Mike. I've got to introduce you to Mike." It's like, all right, cool. Introduce me to Mike. And then she calls out the whole floor, "Hey, Mike!" And totally unseen, it's like a critter popping up out of the ground. This white guy named Mike pops his head above the cubicles, and then comes over, and she's so excited. "You guys look exactly the same." and this guy Mike looks at me. I give him a look. We're like, we look nothing alike. All white guys look the same. I get it. But what was really interesting, I asked, later, said, "Hey, how much of this floor is like H-1B, is temporary labor or special status labor?" And it was a large percentage of people. And I asked, well, what do they actually do? And it was junior programmers. They were doing debugging. They were doing, support tickets. They were doing whatever. And one of the other things that I learned is that the wage level for a lot of these H-1Bs, predominantly from India, they were at a 50 to 70% discount relative to native-born American workers doing the same jobs. And they were locked into the company because of the visa status. They couldn't job hop. They couldn't get competitive offers.
Right.
And so you have essentially
it's indentured servitude.
It's an insourcing rather than an outsourcing. That you can suppress the wages, that you can have essentially cheap labor that is a form of indentured servitude. We don't want to be too, it's a metaphor. It's not exactly the same thing, obviously. But okay. it really, you can always go back to India, but they're making a multiple on what they would make in India. And they're making a fraction of what the companies are paying a fraction of what they would pay to domestic labor. And so it's like, this program has to be scrapped. This is not the right thing to do. And I think the idea of a higher floor is a good one, because then companies would really have to select that top tier talent. And look, the United States should bring in top tier talent from all over the world. But we have to admit that, you see the H-1B logs, it's like the manager at a 7-Eleven. Is not exactly bringing Werner Braun in.
No, it's like, a total scam. It's a total scam. And like, I'm actually, I'm like in search of the good argument for why we need to be importing hundreds of thousands of H-1Bs every year. I frankly don't.
The argument is really easy. It's that tech companies want it, and tech companies want to get.
But tough.
Want to get a payout from Trump. That's
sorry, tough. Like, okay, you're an American company, and you get all of the benefits of being an American company. You have this robust legal system, this is the thing that gets lost in all these conversations, actually kind of drives me crazy, is like, all of these subtle benefits that you get by working with Americans and being in an American company. There are these unspoken norms of doing business, these expectations that you can come into business relationships with about fairness, about sort of being lawful, about how you negotiate deals. You have all this robust infrastructure around, like, your company. You have
lack of corruption, which is endemic almost everywhere else.
You have this, so you have like the entirety, really, in some sense, of like Western civilization that your company rests on top of and exists because of. Like, this capitalist system you know, like these neoliberals, like the Cato Institute people or whoever, just think that this all just exists in some kind of like abstract vacuum, this hypothetical vacuum. No, all of this stuff rests on this long history that we've produced through a lot of struggle and strife and resources that have been put to bear on building out this infrastructure that allows these companies to be efficiently run. In return for having this ballast on top of which you have this productive firm, you have some responsibility to hire the people who've allowed this to exist in the first place. And by the way, in the long term, it is better for you. It is going to be better for you to have a productive native workforce. And so I really, any tech people out there who are listening to this, do not lose sight of the fact of what the long-term horizon looks like if you abandon a native workforce. People are not going to put up with this for more than a single, maybe even just a half a generation. The people are going to get restless, and you're not going to like what that looks like on the other side.